And
Brenda's making coffee at the moment.
oh, okay. How long is she going to be? How are you, Jeff? Are you still
I'm still
symptom-free?
positive because I tested yesterday, but I feel 100%. I feel very good indeed.
Makes you wonder how many of us might be positive and not know it, honestly.
Absolutely.
It certainly does.
Okay, just do this. Okay, has everyone got the screen there?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Okay, 1 second. Let's right. Okay, Iris, over to you.
Hang on. Aaron's grandson, Pinchas.
Sorry, 1
Oh.
second. Right, yes. Yeah, you got it back?
Aaron's grandson Pinchas is rewarded for his act of zealotry in killing the Simeonite prince Zimri and the Midianite princess who was his paramour. God grants him a covenant of peace and the priesthood. A census of the people counts 601,730 men between the ages of 20 and 60. Moses is instructed on how the land is to be divided by lottery among the tribes and families of Israel. The 5 daughters of Zelophehad petitioned Moses that they be granted the portion of the land belonging to their father, who died without sons. God accepts their claim and incorporates it into the Torah's laws of inheritance.
God accepts.
Moses empowers Joshua to succeed him and lead the people into the land of Israel. The Parsha concludes with a detailed list of the daily offerings and the additional offerings brought on Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, first of the month, and the festivals of Passover, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeret.
Right, thank you. Sorry about that. I was trying to do the share and it's playing around. Anyway, right, okay. So that's this week's Sedra Pinchas. So actually, Pinchas, by the way, is the one that a lot of the maftes, the additional readings that we read on Yom Tov, comes from because it has all the different festivals in it. Okay, we're going to talk about crowns today. Right, very, what do you call it? Jubilee oriented. Right, here we go. So, first source, right? This is one of the things that's happening this week is the change of leadership. So let's have a look at this. Who would like to read number 1? Pat, go on.
Moses said to the Lord, "May the Lord God of the spirits of all flesh appoint a man over this community to go out and come in before them, one who will lead them out and bring them in. So the Lord's people will not be like sheep without a shepherd."
Right. Succession is always a big issue in organizations, right? In families. You can be the most successful leader, but if you don't think about succession, it can all fall apart. And when you go, right? And we've spoken, I think, about this before. The wording is very, very specific. He says that someone who will go out and come in before them. In other words, someone who will lead from the front, right? Who will lead them forward and bring them back, not tell them forward, men, but rather follow me, right? Okay. So what prompts this? Well, what's happened recently? Aaron has died, Miriam has died, right? This is what Hashem says to Moshe, not too far off. Just before that, who would like to read number 2? Just go on.
God said to Moses, "Ascend these heights of Obron and view the land that I have given the Israelite people. When you have seen it, you too shall gather to your king, just as your brother Aaron was."
Right. So Moshe's mindful of his mortality. He's thinking about the future. There's something else that's happened just before this, interestingly, which might have prompted his. Now, he doesn't say explicitly about his sons, but maybe there's kind of an inherent assumption that, we're talking here about succession. The obvious people to consider would be his sons. I don't know what else. Did we say it in the? I don't remember if we said it in the summary, but we've got, of course, the daughters of Tzlachad, right? who came and complained that they don't have an inheritance because their father died. He was the one gathering the sticks on Shabbos, right? He wasn't part of the calf, ironically, because he died before that. So the Midrash says that this might have prompted Moshe's own thoughts about inheritance. Inheritance is on his mind, right? Aaron and Miriam have died. He's just had this discussion, this halachic whatever, with the daughters of Tzalachad. So it's very much on his mind. Let's see what the Midrash says. Powell Julian, would you like to read that?
Yeah. What was Moses' reason for making this request? After declaring the order of inheritance, just this, that when the daughters of Zelophehad inherited from their father, Moses reasoned, the time is right for me to make my own request. If daughters inherit, it is surely right that my sons should inherit my glory. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, he who keeps the fig tree shall eat its fruit. Your sons sat idly by and did not study the Torah. Joshua served you faithfully and showed you great honor. It was he who rose early in the morning and remained late at night at your house of assembly. He used to arrange the benches and spread the mats. Seeing that he has served you with all his might, he is worthy to serve Israel, for he shall not lose his reward.
Right. So it's a double tragedy here. Moshe's going to die. You know, sometimes a person's going to die, right? We know the story with Jacob and the Shema Yisrael, but they know that their children will carry on their legacy. Here, I don't even remember, what are his sons called? Gershom and Elazar, what were they called? Eliezer, right, I think?
No, wasn't that Aaron's son?
No, it was Elazar.
Elazar.
Yeah, just to confuse you. One second, let me see. I think it was Gershom and Eliezer, but the very fact we don't know, right? They're not, it should roll off your tongue. Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, everyone knows. Oh, Gershom and Eliezer, yeah. They're just kind of like, we never hear about them. I mean, it says here, the Midrash says they didn't study Torah. I don't know, maybe they, nowadays they call it going off the derech. You know, maybe they went off the rails. I don't know. So on the one hand, it's a terrible tragedy that he doesn't enter the promised land. And Aaron, at least his sons carried on the priesthood. Moshe, you know, just by the way, you will come across people originally who will say, I'm a Cohen, and I can trace my lineage back to Aaron a Cohen, right? Now, most people can't do that, but there are certain people. I think the Maharal of Prague was one. I think the Maharal of Prague was a descendant of, no, it wasn't the Maharal. Sorry, the Maharal was a descendant of tribe of Yehuda, of David HaMelech. There are people who are known to be Kohanim who could trace themselves back to Aaron. I don't remember who. So whoever says, oh, I trace myself back to Moshe, the family line basically just disappeared. So on the one hand, it's a tragedy, but also it's a very powerful idea that yes, there were dynasties. There were dynasties for Kohanim, sometimes their children took over, and the kingship. But there's also this kind of egalitarian sort of aspect that even Moshe, the greatest of the leaders, right? There wasn't automatic succession to his children. Anyone could have attained this, right? Yeshua was not his child, and yet he attained leadership. So from this we see, it's not a hereditary thing at all, right? And who was the, sorry?
Did Miriam have any children that are remembered?
Good question. Miriam was married to Kalev. Are her children mentioned? I don't know that they are, but they wouldn't have belonged to the tribe of Levi because Kalev was from, what tribe was he from? Kalev? Can't remember. I don't remember what tribe he was from. Let's see, what tribe was he from? 1 second. He's from the tribe of Yehuda. Oh, there you go. So that wouldn't have affected the, right? Because when you married, you took on your husband's tribe. So he was from the tribe of Yehuda. So they may well have done, but they wouldn't have carried on this lineage. Although you could ask a very good question. The whole story of Bnei Selachad, if Moshe doesn't have fitting children, why shouldn't Miriam's? Right? This is the whole debate in this country about the monarchy. Who was the person who very eloquently expressed the idea that we can all be leaders? and we can all attain the crown of leadership. I'll give you a clue. He wasn't a good guy.
Korah.
Right, Korach. Let's see what Korach said. Remember it from a few weeks ago. Here we go. Whose turn to read? Iris, I think we're back to you, no?
No, I haven't read.
Oh,
No,
sorry,
Pam
Pam, please.
hasn't.
Pam, please.
All the congregation are holy, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you, Moses, set yourselves above the congregation?
And we said when we learned this, the first part is fine. It's only when Korach says, and if anyone's going to be leader, why shouldn't it be me, right? All men are created equal. So far, so good. Some are more equal than others. That's where the problem occurs, right? But Korach isn't the only one who said this. Do you know who else said this? Who's this? Moshe himself. Remember when Eldad and Medad were going around giving prophecy? The end of, I think it's Nassau.
Oh, yeah, was that Joshua said it to Moses?
No, Joshua was the one that came to Moshe and said, you need to deal with them. They need to be vanquished. They're causing trouble. They're going around saying things and prophesying. And what did Moshe say? Iris, we're back to you now.
But Moses said to him, are you wrought up on my account? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his spirit on them.
Right, so Moshe says, no, listen, I wish everyone would have the spirit of prophecy, the spirit of, I suppose, leadership, right? Prophets were not hereditary, right? Prophets were appointed on merit, right? They were often chosen by God. It didn't follow that your father was a prophet, you were going to be a prophet, right? It did often follow if your father was a Cohen, well, obviously you're going to be a Cohen, but more than that, if they had a role, the Cohen Gadol did sometimes pass the children, as did the kingship. Not always, but the prophecy did not. Interestingly, we find that the Rabbonos, the rabbinic positions in traditional halacha were inherited. So it was quite normal in traditional sort of halachic terms for a son to expect to succeed his father, which doesn't necessarily sit with all this biblical stuff, by the way. I mean, there have been dinei Torah where, you know, a father's retired or passed on, the son has expected the position, not been offered it, and then gone to a beis din and said, this is not fair. Right? I think the two things that come up most frequently in beis din, I'm not a great expert on this, but from reading the Jewish Chronicle, which is not a reliable newspaper over many, many years, and I know in Australia these things have come. I think the two things that come up most frequently in beis din regarding employment would be, number one, what you would call, at least in America, tenure, right? I think it's more of a thing in America. Academics have tenure. You basically have life tenure. And once you have tenure, you can say all kinds of, you know, outrageous things and publish outrageous articles. And unless you really completely go over the top, you basically got the security of your tenure. If you don't have tenure, you can be fired potentially from position. I don't know how tenure works exactly, but it's something that's given after a certain number of years. You have tenure, basically you have lifetime protection. It was the same in the rabbinates. That once appointed, it was kind of an expectation, something called chazakah. But you couldn't just say to a rabbi, we don't like your sermons anymore, we're getting rid of you. And rabbonim have gone to beis din where they've been, you know, fired by congregations, not obviously talking for like indiscretions, but just because, you know, they want someone new or someone different, or, you know, the contracts run out, and they've said, well, in halacha we have tenure, we have chazaka. And the other one is where a son's expected to take over from a father. Now, sometimes the son is a worthy successor to a father. Sometimes they're not. Even in the Hasidic world, the sons don't always take over. Sometimes the son's-in-law, sometimes a cousin. Sometimes, as what often happens with Hasidic groups, and it's a shame, it happened with, I think, Sassov. The Sassov Rebbe was quite well known in London. I don't remember his name, but he was a holy man. And many people went to him and to his shul. I can't think what his name was, but he died a couple of years ago, I think, last year. And instead of having one successor, I think, as often happens, that there were family tensions, and the widow had one preference and the oldest son had a different preference. And they now have, I think, 5 different branches around the world, and they don't talk to each other, which is sad. So that can happen also. But it's not generally, certainly this idea, Moshe's leadership is clearly not hereditary. It's not only Korach who says that, Moshe himself says that. Here's what Hannah says when she's giving thanks for the birth of her son, right? Eli, who later becomes the priest, the high priest that Shmuel takes under his wing. Let's see that. Who are we up to? Well, if we're going around again, Jeff or Brenda, go on.
Yeah. The Lord gives poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the weak from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor.
So certain things we have a caste system for, like the kahuna, the Cohen, but other things, anyone can sit with the princes, right? It's a very powerful idea in Judaism of equality, basically. It's not always been carried out in practice. This is one of the ideas of the Baal Shem Tov when the Hasidic movement started, that the simple Jew in the street is as important and as holy as the greatest scholar. They deserve the same recognition. It doesn't matter who your parents were or what society you grew up in. And finally, here's from the beginning of Kedoshim. Whoever did, Brenda, do you want to read that?
The Lord said to Moses, speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy.
I think we even discussed before the idea that there was even, I think we once quoted a midrash recently. I think maybe it was the Rambam even, I don't remember, but we had a source recently that basically said that when we talk about a Kohen as being somebody that's devoted to God and to holiness and to a higher cause, I think we said that anyone who is idealistic and altruistic and is prepared to sacrifice, right, can also have the same idea of the Kohen, that they become elevated and they become holy. It's not reserved for people who have it by birthright. Any Jew can do that by virtue of their actions, particularly when they sanctify their everyday activities and they act in a holy way. So it's not the purview of only the great and the good. This is a very important idea. And we see the extreme manifestation of that when Moshe says, appoint a leader, he may well mean his children, but it's not them. Right? So we're not talking to the priests or the prophets, the elite, but this is everyone. Every single person has the power. Right? Korach was wrong, not with what he said, but with his motivation. His motivation was, Moshe, we're all equal, great. And by the way, why should you have all the power? I want some power. Wait a minute, you just said we're all equal. Do you believe that or not? Right? So this is often the case. Ironically, he was right on the ball, but for the wrong reasons. Korach's problem is that a leader has to also be a follower, right? The queen, when she spoke, and when people speak, they speak about service, right? Well, which is it? Is she all powerful or is she a servant? Right? We talk about public servants. Like when a rabbi has an induction and say, Ana after the Kuchabricha, I'm a servant of the Almighty. I'm a servant of the congregation. Well, which are you? Are you an authority at the top of the hierarchy, or are you a servant on the bottom? So it's both. It's both. So a good leader has to recognize that. Moshe certainly had that recognition. Korach failed. He's thought about the power. And fundamental point is that when it comes to Torah and Torah leadership, anybody can attain it. It doesn't matter who you are. It's not a gift, a birthright by any means, right? And if we didn't see that in olden times, we certainly see that in our generation, where many, many, many people have chosen very different paths from their parents, right? All extremes. It's not uncommon to have somebody who might have been a great rabbi who, I always remember I once met a lady who was a galach, and her grandfather had been a reverend in one of the shuls in Wales. It was tragic, She became a galach, And then on the other hand, you have people who, whose parents or grandparents were completely secular, who have become religious, and in some cases become great rabbis and leaders, or rebbetzins even. So we see this even in our own times. Right? And you'll still get the old person that says, oh, well, don't know. My daughter's going out with a nice boy, but he didn't grow up from, or his parents were gayrim or whatever. But actually, if we look in Jewish tradition, shouldn't we be looking at a person's personal qualities, not their yichus? And we know the old joke. If you look at everyone's yichus, then Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov would fail a shidduch because they all had family problems. So Rambam reminds us of a very important principle here. I think it was the Vilna Gaon, by the way, who said that yichus is like a zero. So if you put a 1 in front of it, it's a multiplier. Right? It would be ridiculous to suggest that your upbringing and your social station and your yichus, if you like, doesn't shape you as a person. We all know we're shaped by our surroundings and our opportunities. Somebody who was given greater opportunities, educational opportunities, Jewish education opportunities potentially will have advantages, but those advantages are only there if they choose to use them. So if you make something on your relationship with God and you serve God and you genuinely, really take to heart when you daven, it's a meaningful service of God. And on top of that, your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents are all great rabbis and teachers and scholars, and you grew up in that environment, of course it's going to help you. But if you don't tap into it, then it's a zero, it's nothing. It'd be ludicrous to suggest that people are not affected by their surroundings, by their upbringing, but only to a point. Let's see what Maimonides has to say about this. We have this in the Avos as well. Pam or Julian, would you like to read?
Sorry. With 3 crowns was Israel crowned, with the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. The crown of priesthood was bestowed on Aaron and his descendants. The crown of kingship was conferred on David and his successors. But the crown of Torah is for all Israel. Whoever wishes, let them come and take it. Do not suppose that the other 2 crowns are greater than that of Torah. The crown of Torah is greater than the other 2 crowns.
Right, and I think it says elsewhere in Pirkei Avos that your table is greater than the king's table, right? So it's not just a metaphor here. There were multiple strands of leadership throughout Jewish history, and as we learn Tanakh, we see some of them were disastrous, right? You had the priesthood, which we know the Kohen Gadol would sometimes not make it out of the Holy of Holies alive because he wasn't worthy, right? But you had that, which was often, but not always. Well, no, the Kahuna was always going to be Aaron and his descendants, but it didn't run from father to son necessarily, right? It could go to a different family, a different Kohen. Kingship was David Hamelech. So the truth is, even there, actually, it's interesting because both the what we call the Kahuna, which is the priesthood, and the Malchus, which is the kingship, on the one hand, they are confined to a certain caste of society. But on the other hand, they weren't automatically hereditary. So you had a bit of both. It says the crown of Torah is there for everyone to take and is greater than the other 2, right? So throughout the biblical area, you had prophets, you had kings, and you had Kohanim. The kings and the Kohanim were often dynastic, right? Passed down through father to son. With the destruction of the temple, there was no Kohen or king, but there were no prophets in the conventional sense, but it was the rabbis who saw themselves as the heirs to the prophets, right? As we see from the beginning of Avot. Are we back? No, sorry, Pam, who are we back to? I've lost track.
Me.
Pam.
Moses received the Torah from Sinai and handed it on to Joshua, who handed it on to the elders of the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly.
Right, so I'd say I see 2 things there. Number one, that the men of the great assembly were the heirs to the prophets. Those were basically the rabbinic leaders in the post-destruction of temple times, right? The Anshe Knesset Hagadolah. But the other thing is, none of these people are related. Moshe, Joshua, the elders, the prophets, right? They're different groups of people on merit, essentially. So if you go back to biblical times, it was very much the priests, the Kohanim, that were the teachers. Actually, we learned this before. That's why the Kohanim didn't have an ancestral land. Their job was, they were the rabbis and the teachers. So the interesting question is, why did not the rabbis of old see themselves? This Mishnah should say, the elders to the Kohanim and the Kohanim to the men of the great assembly, because the Kohanim were the teachers and rabbis of their time often, the spiritual leaders. And the answer is because although that's true, it was a dynasty, whereas the prophets were unpredictable. They weren't automatically given to their children. And if you want a model of rabbinic leadership, it's better to look at prophets. So the prophets, the natural predecessors to the men of the great assembly. The prophets were appointed on merit or on godly whim, but they weren't appointed because of their parentage. So which is it? Is the Torah a family inheritance, as it were? Or is it for all of us? And the truth is we find a contradiction in this, right? One of the most famous verses in the Torah, which children are taught from an early age. Whose turn is it to read? Where are we up to? Julian, I think. Right, give us the Hebrew as well.
Torah
Well, no,
Tzivah
that's
Lanu
one.
Moshe, Marasha Kehilas Yaakov. Moses commanded us the Torah as an inheritance, Marasha, of the congregation of Jacob.
It sounds like it's an inheritance. Inheritance is something you pass down to your children. On the other hand, oops, I just lost my place. Sorry. What have I done? Sorry, I just completely lost my place. How do I do that? Oh, right, sorry. Okay, so, but on the other hand, this is from Pirkei Avos. Iris, would you like to read?
Prepare yourself to learn Torah, for it is not given to you as an inheritance, Yerusha.
Wait, you just said it's a Morashah, Kehilas Yaakov. That's from the same root. Moshe commanded us the Torah as an inheritance. It's our birthright. And now you're saying, prepare yourself to learn Torah because it's not an inheritance. So which is it?
It's for the people that adhere to it. It's an inheritance for the ones that adhere to it.
So there's two types of inheritance. I should have done a slide for this. In biblical Hebrew, there's two words for an inheritance. There's a Yerusha, right, which is a Morashah, which we just had, like the primary school called Marasha, right, which is an inheritance. And there's a Nachala, which comes from the word river. So a Yerusha means from Yoresh, which means to take possession, something you have title to, but you might need to do something to take possession of. A Nachala implies something that flows automatically, just like a river flows downstream to the lowest point automatically and naturally. So it is with a Nachala. So the word used here for an inheritance is not the word for a hereditary peerage or something like that, which would be a Nachala. It's a Yerusha. It's the crucial difference. A hereditary time, yeah.
Is that anything to do with the word Yerushalayim or not?
Good question. I don't think so, because I think that comes from Yerushalayim, which means city of peace. Yerushalayim, I believe is where it comes from. Yerushalayim, city of peace. Though everything in Hebrew is meaningful, so it's quite possible that you're right. We do find the word in there, actually, interestingly. Sorry, let me just check my battery. Yeah, I'm okay. 32 minutes. Okay. There's a Nachala and a Merashah. Nachala is something that flows automatically like a river, but a Merashah is something you have to actually go and take possession of. Right? Someone might say, you know, you've inherited a castle from your great grandmother, you're going to have to go and do it up and sell it and whatever. You know, you don't just get it on a plate, right? Or someone might say, you've inherited this car and basically you can drive it away today. So a hereditary title, like a peerage, a dukedom, an earldom, whatever they call it, passed from father to son. And so is a family business, but there's a difference, right? A dukedom is something you get whether you deserve it or not. The family business, you might get it, but if you mess it up, right, you're not gonna have it to pass on to your kids. I know often you have someone works a family business, it's a bit of a joke, they don't really do any work. But where there's work required, if the son is not worthy or the daughter, then they'll basically mess up the business, right? And they won't have it to pass on to the next generation. So the Torah is the same thing. It's not just a title that gets passed down. It's like a family business. So yes, you inherit it as your family business, as your right, but you have to do something with it. If you don't do anything with it, then it doesn't work for you. The rabbis put it very cleverly. Iris, did you just read? I've forgotten.
I did, yes.
Right. Oh, so back to the bendons, right? Beryl, I'm assuming you can't see, right?
No, I can't.
Okay. So Jeff or Brenda, off you go.
Moses commanded us the Torah as an inheritance, Morasha, of the congregation of Jacob. Read not inheritance, Morasha, but betrothed, Merosha.
Right. If you look at the Hebrew word, which I should have done there, Morashah, if you change the dot on the shin to the other side, Morasa means engaged, like Erusin. Right? Erusin means engagement. So the rabbi said, don't read it as a Morashah, an automatic inheritance, but read it as a betrothal. In other words, it's a relationship. We have a relationship. We are married to the Torah, but a marriage requires work. So you have to earn, you have to love it in order to inherit it. So when Rabbi Yossi said it's not given to you as an inheritance. What he meant by that was that it's everyone's, it's not automatic, it's everybody's inheritance. So he didn't mean to say that we don't all have it. He meant to say that it's not given to you automatically. So don't think because my father was a great rabbi or my father was a president of a shul or whatever, that I have a silver spoon in my mouth. Each person has the ability to do it themselves. And the truth is that's a good policy generally for education, right? Societies get into trouble when education becomes the purview of only the elites, right? And that's been the problem through history. The problem in America today that people in certain communities are basically caught in a cycle of poverty and poor education, and it just perpetuates because then the previous generation had poor education, they can't afford to move out of the ghetto, and then they raise their kids in the same environment where it's not a particularly healthy environment. There aren't too many opportunities, and once in a while someone managed to escape that environment, and they're often looked down upon by the community because they'll say, oh, you think you're better than us, right? So the sages in the Talmud asked this question. They said quite often it seems that not all rabbis, if someone was a rabbi, their son wasn't necessarily a rabbi. It's true nowadays. It's certainly true in the old days. Let's see what the Talmud says. Right, whoever didn't read, Jeff or Brenda, whoever.
And why is it not usual for scholars to give birth to sons who are scholars? Yosef said, so that it should not be said that the Torah is their inheritance.
Right, we're concerned that if people will just take it for granted, then they won't work on themselves and they won't work on it. It'll also become something elitist. We don't want the Torah to become something elitist, right? We want to guard against such attitudes, right? All these things, everyone is holy. The whole congregation is holy. We're all priests. These are very important ideas in Judaism. They're central tenets of Judaism. Anybody can elevate themselves. It doesn't matter what their circumstances. Like we see other people like Rabbi Akiva, who started learning at 40, right? Anything that negates that is dangerous. So we don't want people saying, well, my son got into this yeshiva not because of his academic ability, but because he's my son, because the family name, right? It shouldn't work that way. The rabbis were very concerned with this. Here's a debate between Hillel and Shammai, right? It says in Pirkei Avos, raise up many disciples. So who should you raise? Let's see. Pam or Julian?
Yeah.
Raise up many disciples. The school of Shammai says, a person is to teach only one who is wise, humble, of good stock and rich. But
Can I just stop you a second? Is that how you would interpret raise up many disciples?
Well, it's going a lot further. It's right.
It does sound a lot more. Right. To me, raise up many disciples means have lots of students. Shammai says have elite students. Let's see what Hillel says.
The school of Hillel says everyone is to be taught, for there were many transgressors in Israel who were attracted to the study of Torah, and from them sprang righteous, pious, and worthy men. To what may it be compared? To a woman who sets a hen to brood on eggs. Out of many eggs she may hatch only a few, but out of a few eggs she hatches none at all.
Right. So you should put all your eggs in one basket. Right. So if you said, oh, you know what, only 1 in 10 eggs that get, what do they call it? Can't think what the word is when hens sit on eggs. There's a name for it. Whatever it is.
Hatch.
Only 1 in 10 eggs actually hatches. You know what? I'll just do a few. Well, no, surely you do as many as you can in the hope that at least 1 in 10 will. So Hillel, who we know is the one we often follow, who's the more kind of charitable one, right, takes the less elitist view. Shammai takes the more elitist view. You never know who you're talking to. You never know who a person is. That's another axiom of Judaism that, the guy sitting next to you on the bench who's homeless could be Elijah, right? It's who are we to judge just because of external appearances? You never know what a person is or who they are or what they do. So everybody has the potential for greatness. Let's see what the Talmud said. Right. Whose turn is it?
It's me. Raise up many.
Sorry, 1 second. No, sorry. Sorry,
No,
I've done something wrong. I've done something wrong. My fault. 1 second. Sorry. Oh, I didn't get this source. Oh, I copied. Right, I'll have to read it for you. Okay. I forgot to, sorry, I didn't change the slide. So there's a
Okay.
story in the Talmud. This is the story. Once Rav came to a certain place where, though he had decreed a fast for rain, no rain fell, right? So they've got a drought. There's all these holy people fasting and there's no rain. Eventually, someone else stepped forward in front of Rav, came up to the ark and prayed. Mashiv Aruah, right? So causes the wind to blow, and immediately the wind blew. Umarid Atal, the rain to fall, and immediately the rain fell. Right? There's lots of stories like this about people, if you recall, like, young shepherd boys that got it to rain and things like that. So Rav said to him, wow, we're all praying for rain, and meanwhile your prayers get answered. What do you do? What's your job? What's your special merit that God answers your prayers? He said, I don't know what to tell you. He said, I teach young children. I teach Torah to the children of the poor as well as the children of the rich. From those who cannot afford it, I take no payments. And I have a fish pond, and I give fish to any boy who refuses to study, so that he comes to study. So what was this chap's merit? Number one, he teaches those that can't afford it. And number two, he basically bribes the kids to study. And this was such a merit that the rain fell in his merit. Now, is that always the attitude? No, it's not. There's always going to be elitist tendencies. There's always going to be those who can afford it, have a better education. If you would say, what is a Jewish value? A Jewish value is making sure that everyone gets a good education and that opportunities are available to all. I would say that that has been a central value in Jewish communities and Jewish societies, and still is to this very day. Right? The centrality of education, of Jewish schools, of cheder, of learning, of education, of making things available for people in English or in with explanations, or printing books that are accessible. We've talked before about the fact that we were one of the first societies to have education for all. Right? In the times, I think the Talmud even speaks about, right, this story here. You go back even 100, 150 years. If you could afford a governess for your children, that was great. If not, they were probably in a workhouse somewhere. Yes, they didn't have education. We had education back in the day. So it's tragic that Moshe's sons never took over from him, but it's actually very emblematic of this idea. The Torah is our inheritance. Who was his successor, his greatest student? Right, let's see what Rabbi Sachs says. Let's conclude with Rabbi Sachs. Iris, you can be Rabbi Sachs.
I didn't read, Rabbi.
Sorry, Pam, sorry, you can be Rabbi Sachs. Okay.
Moses' tragedy was Israel's consolation. The Torah is their inheritance. The fact that his successor was not his son, but Joshua, his disciple, meant that one form of leadership, historically and spiritually the most important of the three crowns, could be aspired to by everyone. Dignity is not a privilege of birth. Honor is not confined to those with the right parents. In the world defined and created by Torah, everyone is a potential leader. We can all earn the right to wear the crown.
Very good.
Right. So we know from our Tanya share, we always talk about free choice. In the end, everyone has free choice. Right? There will always be those who will say, I can bring proofs from the Torah why, it's important to be elitist. If you're not elitist, then there'll never be great scholars, because we have to be elitist because not everyone can achieve greatness. But the sort of egalitarian thread is a lot stronger, really. The greatest crown is Torah, and Torah is everyone's inheritance, meaning that everyone can earn it if they want. Right? We are all children of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It doesn't matter who your actual parents were. It's a very important idea, which even today sometimes gets overlooked, right? Unfortunately. It's a very powerful idea. This idea that it's something we can all access. It doesn't matter what your circumstances. It's not some privilege of birth. Right? It doesn't pass on to your children just because. So it's a very important idea. It's a very central idea. And we see it from Moshe himself. You can't get more fundamental than that. Moshe himself, I still don't know what his kids did, to be honest. I don't know what his grandchildren's names were. We know what Aaron's grandchildren's names were. They're given in great detail. Yeah, we know who, the King David and all those were, because we're given in great detail. But Moshe faded into oblivion. It doesn't matter, because the lesson in that is very clear. Whoops, I'm trying to stop sharing. Now let's stop sharing. Oh, here we go. The lesson in that is very clear, that basically it's not elitist. We can all achieve it. Right, any questions?
What was Moses very upset about his children? He must have realized that they weren't
Well,
suitable to be.
right. Well, like the true servant and great humble man he was, right? He almost immediately embraces Yeshua. And of course, one of the important things is we know is that in the Torah, right, that says that in Moshe's lifetime, he endorsed Yeshua, right? It says he basically gave him smicha, he handed over the leadership to him, which is a very important idea, right? That's how you avoid all these family feuds. If he hadn't done that, could have been one of Moshe's sons would say, I'm the leader, my dad was Moshe. But in front of the whole community, Yeshua was appointed. So if Moshe was upset, he didn't, at the end of the day, he took it on the chin. I mean, we're not told explicitly, but the assumption is that he would have wanted his kids to take over. But presumably he also recognized their failings. An interesting question would be why they failed. Why weren't his sons great scholars? I mean, we know that we're told he got divorced because his wife couldn't take his work ethic, right? He was always talking to God the whole time. I don't remember where we see that. It's not explicit. We've talked about it before. Like many great people, his home life may have been challenging. So maybe he was never home to learn with his kids. Who knows? Or maybe they got teased in school because their dad was, famous. Who knows?
Couldn't keep up with it.
But like everything, we always say that everything that happens is there to teach us in our generation a lesson. The lesson is that we can all achieve the greatness.
It doesn't seem as though his sons made a fuss about it either, because we don't hear anything about them kicking up a fuss.
Right.
Or resenting Joshua or trying to.
I made a flippant remark earlier that may have gone off the rails. There's no suggestion on that. The suggestion is just that they weren't as studious as Yeshua, basically. Which, fair enough. You don't have to be.
They've probably been influenced way because she could see how it affected Moshe's life, what he had to do for Hashem.
Yeah.
Want that for her children.
Yeah. But many rabbis today will tell you that, their kids often miss out on family time because of their roles. So it's not a new problem. Certain professions where the family is adversely affected perhaps more than others, certainly an issue. So it's not a criticism of him per se, but it's just a fact of life. Interesting question would have been, what if his children had been appointed? They would have risen to the challenge, perhaps. But I guess that wasn't the thought. Sorry, Iris, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, maybe they really, having seen what their father had to go through, they didn't want to be.
Right, exactly. Yeah, who would want it? Right. Who would want it? Yeah, who would want it? The stress. If you recall, he said that Moshe at times was, a breaking point. He says to God, "Kill me now." And people say that as a joke. Kill me now, right? When someone says, I'm now going to sing an operetta or something. That someone says, "Kill me now," like saying, "Oh God, I can't take this anymore." Moshe actually said that, if you recall. So, they may well have seen that. Yes, correct. That would definitely be definitely be relevant. Okay. All right. I think we'll stop there. Hope everyone's getting lots of water.
Yeah.
And we'll see you hopefully Shabbos.
Hopefully.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
okay. We didn't. Sorry.
He's a fraud.
What?
She's saying I'm a fraud.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
Not your fault. Jeff, you could always pretend you'd got a few symptoms.
Yes, you could always
For
fake
what reason?
Yeah.
So that she won't think you're a fraud.
Yeah.
But listen, it's better that you're not ill.
Oh,
yeah.
Definitely.
That's the main thing, Jeff.
Yeah. Rabbi, are you in contact with Matt Tiller at all?
Hang on, are you still recording?
Fun enough.
You're still recording, Rabbi.
1 second. Let me just turn it off. Let me stop recording. 1 second.